Florida, Pinellas County, Dunedin. Buena Vista Drive, House 129, end of March 2022. 8 a.m. The air over St. Joseph Bay is transparent and still, but a heavy mechanical hum breaks the silence. A yellow Caterpillar excavator slowly swings its boom. Its steel bucket, caked in lime dust, hangs over the tile roof of a 7,667 square foot mansion. The machine operator sees no history. He sees a demolition site. This is not just the demolition of a building. This is the destruction of evidence from one of America's strangest tragedies. Just a few weeks before this moment, an event on the lawn in front of the house looked more like looting than a sale. Auctioneers shouted prices for doorknobs, toilets, and pieces of marble facing. People tore out pieces of walls, paying hundreds of dollars for old light fixtures, trying to carry away a piece of the legend. They were dismantling, piece by piece, the house that once belonged to a man who changed how the whole world eats breakfast. The new owner of the lot, developer David Wenck, paid $4 million for this place. In the purchase documents, the value of the building itself was estimated at close to zero. History, Renaissance architecture, unique frescoes, all of this was recognized as a non-liquid asset. Economics defeated heritage. As the dust from the collapsed wall settles on palm leaves, the interior is visible in the breach. It was once meant to be a paradise for one man. But this paradise was built on a foundation of hatred, lawsuits, and hard industrial calculation. The owner of this palace, Will Keith Kellogg, spent pitifully little time here. The man whose name was printed on billions of boxes of cornflakes built this house not for joy. He bought it as a backdrop for a life he was never able to live. To understand why this pink palace turned into ruins under the tracks of a bulldozer in 2022, we need to rewind the tape 160 years back to the backwoods of Michigan. 1860, Battle Creek. In a family of Seventh-day Adventists, a boy is born. His name is Will Keith, and from his first day of life, he is given the role of a supporting character. This house is ruled by a cult of health, religious fanaticism, and strict discipline. But Will Keith's main problem becomes neither poverty nor religion. His problem becomes his older brother, John Harvey Kellogg. Genius, physician, orator, future superstar of medicine. Against the brilliant John, little Will looks mentally deficient. In school, teachers consider him a slow learner. He struggles to read. He cannot memorize the simplest things. No one yet knows the word myopia. No one thinks to check the child's eyesight. Will simply thinks he is stupid. And this diagnosis is made not by a doctor, but by his own family. He grows up with a feeling of total inadequacy. While John Harvey gets a medical education and becomes the director of the famous Battle Creek Sanitarium, Will becomes his shadow, his servant. John Harvey Kellogg was an eccentric. He believed that 90% of all diseases come from the stomach. He preached vegetarianism, regular enemas, and complete sexual abstinence. The Battle Creek Sanitarium, under his leadership, became a pilgrimage site for the rich and famous. Henry Ford, Thomas Edison, Amelia Earhart came here. They paid huge money to be starved, electrically shocked, and fed tasteless porridge. And who managed the chaos behind the scenes? Who counted the money? Who hired the cleaning ladies? Who made sure the roof didn't leak? Will Keith Kellogg. For 25 years, Will worked for his brother. He was an administrator, an accountant, a gopher. John treated him like furniture. He could summon Will in the middle of the night to dictate his brilliant ideas, while Will obediently wrote them in a notebook. John rode a bicycle, and Will ran alongside, trying not to miss a single word of the orders. For this back-breaking work, Will received pennies. But it was in this shadow, in this humiliating silence, that the character of the man was formed, who one day would buy a mansion in Florida for cash without batting an eye. Will observed. He saw the patients of the sanitarium choking on the dry crackers prescribed by Dr. John. The doctor believed that food should not bring pleasure. Pleasure is a sin. Food should be just fuel. But Will saw what his genius brother did not. He saw the faces of the people. He saw their secret desire to taste. In 1894, a chance occurred that was worth more than all the gold found during the Klondike Gold Rush. The brothers were experimenting with grain in the sanitarium's kitchen. They were trying to make an easily digestible product for the patients. They boiled wheat, but they were distracted by urgent matters. The grain was left to lie and dry out. When they returned and decided to run this grain through the rollers anyway instead of dough, they got thin, separate flakes. Flakes. John Harvey saw in this a new medical product, a strict dietary remedy, dry and bland. Will Keith saw in this a revolution. But one fundamental problem stood between them. One ingredient that for Dr. John was the embodiment of the devil, but for Will was the key to an empire. Sugar. Will suggested adding sugar to the flakes. John flew into a rage. This was a violation of all his medical and moral principles. This was a conflict not just of a recipe. This was a conflict of worldviews. The old world of asceticism versus the new world of consumption. It was at this moment, in the kitchen smelling of scorched grain, that the bomb was planted which would blow up their relationship forever. A bomb, the fragments of which would fly for decades ahead and ultimately materialize in the form of a giant mansion on the shore of the Gulf of Mexico. The very same one which, now, in 2022, is turning into a pile of construction debris. Will Keith Kellogg, a 46-year-old loser, the dumb younger brother, for the first time in his life, decided to say no. He looked at his titan of a brother and understood. It was time to play by his own rules. He did not yet know that this battle would make him one of the wealthiest men in America. But he also did not know that the price of this victory would be measured not in dollars, but in loneliness. A loneliness so deep that not even a 7,000 square foot palace could fill it. 46 years. That is how much time Will Keith Kellogg spent in the shadow. At the beginning of the 20th century, this age was considered the sunset of life. The average life expectancy of an American man at that time was only 47 years. By all statistical laws, Will should have been preparing for death, not for a revolution. But 1906 became the year the dumb younger brother stopped listening to orders. The split was not just business, it was ideological. John Harvey Kellogg, the great physician, looked at cornflakes as a medical procedure. Will Keith Kellogg looked at them as a breakfast for a nation. This fundamental difference in worldview, one wanted to cure the sick, the other wanted to feed the healthy. On February 19, 1906, Will founded the Battle Creek Toasted Cornflake Company. He had no medical diploma, he had no brother's charisma, but he had what John never did, an understanding of mass psychology. Will Keith did something his environment considered madness. He took practically all his savings and borrowed money, a sum equivalent to millions of dollars by today's standards, and invested it not in production, not in factories, but in advertising. In 1906, advertising was considered the domain of charlatans selling snake oil. Serious businessmen relied on reputation. Will Keith spat on reputation. He bought space in America's most popular women's magazines. His first strategy was brilliant and aggressive. The campaign was called "Wink at the Grocer." The text in the Ladies' Home Journal read, "Wink at your grocer and see what you get." Women came to stores, winked at the embarrassed clerks, and received a free sample of cornflakes. This was viral marketing 100 years before the internet appeared. New York buzzed. Sales skyrocketed. But success brought war. Dr. John Harvey Kellogg watched his brother's rise with the fury of an Old Testament prophet. He considered the surname Kellogg his own property. He believed Will had disgraced the family name by adding sugar to the sacred grain and turning a medical product into a commercial commodity. John began to release his own flakes. He called his company the Kellogg Food Company. He tried to choke his brother's business using his authority as a doctor. Customers were confused. They saw two boxes with the same surname. Here we see the true character of Will Keith. That same shy, sullen man who spent half his life running with a notebook goes to court. He files a lawsuit against his own brother. The battle for the name Kellogg lasted for years and reached the Supreme Court of Michigan. This was one of the most brutal corporate wars in American history. The stakes were not just money, but identity. To protect his product from his brother's counterfeits, Will devised a move that would become legendary. He decided to place his personal signature on every box. In red ink, a broad script, W.K. Kellogg. The inscription read, "No package is genuine without this signature." This was an act of final self-assertion. Every time an American bought a box of flakes, they saw the name not of Dr. John, but of Will. The younger brother did not just win, he erased the older one from the history of breakfasts. The court sided with Will. He was given exclusive rights to use the surname Kellogg for commercial purposes. John Harvey was left with his sanitarium and medical theories, which would soon become obsolete. Will Keith got the future. By 1920, Will Keith Kellogg was one of the wealthiest men in the United States. The factories worked around the clock. His fortune grew at a frightening speed. But here a paradox arises, one that will lead us to Florida. Will Keith Kellogg knew how to make money, but he had absolutely no idea how to spend it. He was a man of Victorian stock, a Puritan in a world of jazz and Art Deco. He had no hobbies. He did not drink. He did not go to parties. His only passion was work. He was alone at the top. His wife, with whom he had lived for many years, began to distance herself as his empire grew. Money, instead of uniting the family, created a vacuum. By the mid-20s, Kellogg faced an enemy that could not be sued or bought: age and emptiness. He was already over 60. He had beaten poverty, beaten his brother, beaten the market, and he discovered he had nothing to do. Society at that time had a certain script for millionaires. If you made your success in the North, you had to build a palace in the South. Florida in the 20s was experiencing a crazy real estate boom. It was the promised land for new money. Rockefellers, Vanderbilts, Fords, all rushed there to escape the winter and demonstrate their status. Will Keith, a pragmatic man devoid of romance, decided to follow this script. Not because he wanted to, but because it was expected. He was looking for a place where he could hide his gloom behind a facade of sunny happiness. It was at this moment that the man who would become the catalyst for the appearance of that very mansion entered the scene. Edward Frischkorn, an ambitious developer who dreamed of building the perfect city on the shore of the Gulf of Mexico. Frischkorn did not just sell land, he sold the dream of paradise. He found a plot in Dunedin, which he called Island of Hope. He needed an anchor investor, someone with bottomless pockets, someone who was looking for meaning. The paths of the Cornflakes King and the builder dreamer were destined to cross. Kellogg, with his billions and internal emptiness, was the perfect target. The mansion that would soon begin to be built on Buena Vista Drive was to become a monument to his triumph. But the stone from which the house was built absorbed not only the Florida sun. It absorbed the cold calculation and loneliness of a man who bought this sea view because he didn't know what else to buy. Construction begins. And this would not be just a house. This would be Kellogg's attempt to build himself a new personality. 1925. Florida is in the grip of a fever, but not of gold, but of land. People buy plots they have never seen with money they do not have. This is the time of the Great Gatsby, jazz, and wild optimism. Into this chaos steps Edward Frischkorn. This is the second key player in our story. If Will Keith Kellogg was a genius of efficiency, then Frischkorn was a genius of illusion. He was a developer from Detroit who looked at the swampy shore of Dunedin and saw a new Riviera there. His plan was grandiose. The Dunedin Isles project. Golf courses, luxurious hotels, and the crown of this creation, a waterfront mansion. A house that was to become a magnet for northern millionaires. Frischkorn needed money and prestige. Kellogg needed confirmation that he was no longer his brother's servant. Their meeting was inevitable. This was a strategic marriage of two polar worlds, the severe industrial Michigan, smelling of coal and scorched grain, and the relaxed, orange-scented Florida. Kellogg invests, but he does it with the caution of a predator. He observes. The construction of the mansion at Buena Vista Drive, 129, begins as a manifesto. This is not just a house for living. This is a stage. The architecture of the building is a physical embodiment of the collision of tradition and progress. The Mediterranean Revival style was not chosen by chance. It was to evoke associations with centuries of history, with European aristocracy, with something that did not exist in America. The walls were built from hollow clay blocks, a cutting-edge technology of that time for protection against fire and moisture. But on top of this industrial foundation, a plaster of pink, shell-colored stone was applied. Steel met marble. However, in 1929, the music stopped. The stock market crashed. The Great Depression enveloped America in a black shroud. Frischkorn's empire crumbled to dust. The Dunedin Isles went bankrupt. The mansion that was to become a symbol of success became a monument to hubris. The owner, Austin Seltz, Frischkorn's partner, was on the verge of losing everything. And here, the moment of truth arrives for Will Keith Kellogg. While other millionaires were jumping out of windows on Wall Street, the Cornflakes empire was thriving. Why? Because even in the Depression, people had to eat. And flakes with milk were the cheapest way to feed a family. Kellogg grew richer when the entire country grew poor. In 1934, Kellogg makes his move. He does not build a new house. He takes a finished one. He buys the Villa Marina mansion from the desperate Austin Seltz. The amount of the deal was not disclosed, but Florida real estate historians claim it was a price that was humiliatingly low for the seller and incredibly profitable for the buyer. Kellogg bought someone else's dream at a warehouse liquidation price. This moment transformed his position in society. Now he was not just a manufacturer, he was a feudal lord. He owned the palace that another could not hold. Kellogg's entry into this house in 1934 was a triumph of cold strategy. 7,667 square feet of luxury now belonged to a man who until his 46th year had counted every cent. The house stood on the very shore of St. Joseph Bay. It was a fortress. Inside the mansion, the old met the new. Kellogg, a fanatic of technology, ordered the house to be equipped with the most modern conveniences of that time. But the decor remained deliberately old-fashioned. This fusion of worlds was paradoxical. Outside, Florida, palm trees, heat, wild nature. Inside, heavy European furniture, dark wood, velvet. Kellogg brought with him the atmosphere of the North. He tried to import his world into the tropics. He hired a full staff of servants. Gardeners turned the grounds into a botanical garden. The boathouse was ready to accept yachts. Everything was ready for happiness. But Kellogg made one strategic mistake that no accountant's report could have foreseen. He bought the scenery for a play in which he had no one to act with. The social layer of this acquisition was obvious. Kellogg entered the elite of the South. But the psychological layer was beginning to crack. The huge halls intended for balls stood in silence. Kellogg did not like noisy companies. He walked the corridors of his new estate, checking bills and controlling electricity expenses. The symbolism of the house changed. From Frischkorn's dream of paradise, it became Kellogg's golden cage. The old money looked at him with suspicion. An upstart with cornflakes in an aristocrat's castle. The new money envied his luck. And Kellogg himself? He stood at the window of the second-floor bedroom, looking at the bay, and for the first time, perhaps, understood that victory over his brother and the millions in his accounts had not provided an answer to the main question. Why all this? At this moment, in the mid-30s, the Villa Marina reached the peak of its grandeur. It shone. But within this shine, a darkness was already being born, which would lead to the next tragic turn. Let's go inside. Let's travel to 1935. We stand before the massive oak doors of House 129 on Buena Vista Drive. This building is not just architecture. It is a psychological mold of a man who spent the first 46 years of his life in submission, and the remaining years spent proving his significance. 7,667 square feet of living space, designed to overwhelm anyone who enters with its grandeur. The first thing that strikes the senses is the silence. The thick walls, covered in pink plaster, cut off the sound of the ocean's surf. An unnatural coolness reigns inside. The main hall, a space created for receptions that were rarely held here. The floor is laid with rare tiles, each step echoing with a hollow sound, emphasizing the owner's loneliness. But lift your head, the ceiling. This is the key element of the psychological portrait. Massive beams of pecky cypress, a wood eaten by fungus, which gives it a unique texture. Each beam is hand-painted. Artists spend hundreds of hours on scaffolding, creating patterns that imitate Italian palazzos of the Renaissance era. Kellogg, a man who grew up in the sterile white corridors of the Battle Creek Sanitarium, where any decor was considered an excess, surrounded himself with visual overload. This was a rebellion against his brother's asceticism. If John Harvey Kellogg believed in emptiness and purity, Will Keith Kellogg filled his home with textures, colors, and history. The roof of the house deserves special mention. The tiles were brought from Cuba. This was not new ceramic, but old, taken from dilapidated 18th century Havana mansions. Kellogg bought time. He did not need a reproduction. He needed his house to look as if it had stood here for 300 years, not 3. This is a classic trait of new money of that era, buying a lineage through architecture. Let's move to the dining room, a long table at which 20 people could be seated. but often only one sat here: Will Keith. The menu in this house was a strange compromise. Despite the billions earned on sugar, Kellogg retained many of his healthy eating habits. But now he ate from silver and porcelain, the cost of which exceeded the annual income of his workers. The contrast between the modesty of the contents of the plate and the pomposity of the setting was striking. The main bedroom on the second floor, the Holy of Holies. Here was the object that had become a legend even during the Mogul's lifetime: a 4-poster bed. According to documents and persistent claims of that time, this bed was made from wood taken from the estate of Thomas Jefferson, the 3rd President of the United States. Why would a producer of dry breakfasts need a president's bed? This is not just furniture. This is a symbol of legitimacy. Kellogg, whom half his life had considered a loser, slept in a presidential bed, looking at the bay through French doors. This was a way to remind himself every night, I have won. I am important. But it was here, in this bedroom, that architectural grandeur collides with cruel biological irony. The walls were hung with tapestries. In the niches stood statues. Light fell through complex stained glass windows, coloring the air in ruby and gold tones. The house was created for visual pleasure. However, in the mid-30s, Will Keith Kellogg's vision began to rapidly fade. Diagnosis: glaucoma. Imagine this horror. A man builds one of the most beautiful houses in Florida. He pays for hand-painted ceilings, for mosaics, for the view of the sunset over the Gulf of Mexico. And with each month, this world becomes more and more blurry. The pink marble turns into a gray spot. The painted beams dissolve in the darkness. The house, conceived as a demonstration of power, becomes a labyrinth for a blind old man. Servants recalled how Kellogg walked through these corridors. He touched the walls with his hands. Tactile sensations replaced his vision for him. The cold of the stone, the roughness of the cypress, the velvet of the curtains. He saw his success only with his fingertips. In the house, there were 5 bedrooms and 5 bathrooms. There was a separate guest cottage. There was a boathouse for boats. The entire territory occupied several acres of expensive land. The cost of maintaining this estate in a month was equal to the cost of a good house for an average American family. But there was no children's laughter in these rooms. Kellogg's relationship with his children was complex, strained, poisoned by money and his own heavy character. He tried to control their lives just as he controlled the production of flakes. By 1936, this palace had become a golden cage, not only metaphorically, but physically. Kellogg sat on the terrace, smelled the sea salt, heard the sound of the waves, but the beauty he had bought was slipping away from him. He had surrounded himself with luxury to compensate for the years of humiliation, but the disease was taking away his ability to enjoy this luxury. The God in whom his brother John so fervently believed seemed to have played a cruel joke on Will. You can buy everything on which your gaze falls, but I will take your gaze. It was within these walls, in the darkness of encroaching blindness, that a decision began to form which would forever change the fate of this house and the fate of Kellogg himself. A decision dictated not by ambition, but by deep personal pain. Outside of House 129 on Buena Vista Drive, the Florida sun shone, but inside, a moral darkness was thickening. We are approaching the most uncomfortable part of this story, the moment that transforms Will Keith Kellogg from a mere business genius into a tragic Shakespearean figure. In 1936, while Kellogg was wandering through his luxurious rooms,
almost blind. A drama was unfolding in his life that was never printed on boxes of flakes. The whole world knew Kellogg as a kind grandfather who feeds children. But his own family knew another man, a tyrant, a control freak, a man capable of ice-cold cruelty for the sake of his principles. The main conflict flared not with competitors, but with his own son and heir, John Kellogg. John was the dynasty's only hope. He had worked alongside his father for 20 years. It was John who invented the process of coating flakes with wax so they would stay crunchy longer. He was talented. He was meant to inherit the empire. But John had one weakness by his puritanical father's standards. He wanted to live his own life. When John divorced his wife and married another woman, Will Keith Kellogg perceived this not as his son's personal affair, but as corporate betrayal. The family's moral code was violated. The father's reaction was instantaneous and merciless. He did not just condemn his son, he fired him. He threw his own heir out of the company they had built together. He cut him off from management and essentially wrote him out of the will.
Imagine this scene. The aging, blind mogul sits in his pink palace in Florida. He has millions. He has power. But he has just destroyed his son's future. Here arises that very moral ambivalence. On the one hand, Kellogg is a man of principles. He cannot tolerate debauchery, as he understood it. On the other hand, he is a monster who put his beliefs above the love for his own child. It was during this period of loneliness in Florida that Kellogg's terrible philosophy took shape. I will not leave my children a lot of money because money will corrupt them. He saw how wealth destroyed the Vanderbilt and Rockefeller families. He decided to save his descendants by depriving them of their inheritance. This was a perverted form of care, which looked more like punishment. But the tragedy struck back. Kellogg's grandson, Kenneth, the son of the disgraced John, became a victim of this family war. Deprived of support and stability, he found himself in the center of chaos. Biographers disagree on the details, but the essence is the same. The grandson's life was broken. The most shocking episode, often mentioned by biographers, occurred later, but its roots lie in these years of discord. Kenneth fell from a second-story window. He survived, but was disabled for life. For Will Keith, this was a blow. He could control grain production, he could defeat his brother in court, but he could not glue the broken family back together. The Villa Marina mansion became a backdrop for King Lear. Kellogg realized a terrible truth. He had built an empire to prove his worth, but in the process, he had lost everyone who could have shared his success. In the house in Florida, among tapestries and mosaics, Kellogg received guests. But who were these guests? Not children, not grandchildren. These were lawyers. These were managers of the foundation. It was here that the second key character of this stage appeared. Not a person, but an entity. The W.K. Kellogg Foundation. If his biological family had disappointed him, he decided to create a new family. An artificial one. A perfect one. In 1937, in a state of depression and almost total darkness from glaucoma, Kellogg did something that shocked the local community of Dunedin. He had owned the house for only 3 years. He had poured his soul into it. But now he looked at these walls and saw the meaninglessness in them. Why did he need 5 bedrooms if they were empty? Why did he need a boathouse if there was no one to take out on the boat? The moral conflict reached its peak. Kellogg had to decide.
to continue playing the role of a rich retiree, or to do something radical. He chose radicalism. He called his lawyers and declared, "I give it all away." This was not a gesture of generosity in the usual sense. It was a gesture of desperation and redemption. He decided to give his money and his property to other people's children because he could not make his own happy.
He donated the Villa Marina mansion to his foundation, but with a very strange condition. He wanted this house to serve some purpose, not just a museum, not just an asset. However, at the end of the 30s, it was difficult to find a use for a palace in a small Florida town. The house hung in limbo, as did the soul of its owner. Will Keith Kellogg left Florida. He left behind the pink palace, the sound of the surf, and his unrealized hopes for family happiness. He went into the shadows to engage in philanthropy on a scale the world had never seen. But the house remained, and it was destined to become a hostage to history, passing from hand to hand, changing masks, until the excavator in 2022 put an end to this drama. However, before finally disappearing, the mansion had to endure one more incredible transformation. The war was already at the door. And the pink walls, which had only heard the quiet whisper of a millionaire, would soon hear the thunder of soldiers' boots. 1942. The world was on fire, and the flame of this fire reached even the sleepy coast of Florida. The Pink Palace on Buena Vista Drive, which was built as a refuge from reality, collided with the harshest reality in human history. The silence so valued by the blind mogul was shattered by the roar of engines. A few miles from the mansion, in the same Dunedin, the eccentric inventor Donald Roebling was testing his Alligator, an amphibious machine that could move on both water and land. The military realized this was exactly what was needed for the war in the Pacific. Dunedin became a military base. U.S. Marine Corps officers needed housing, and the Kellogg Foundation, following its new philosophy of service to society, opened the doors of the mansion. Imagine this surreal contrast. Rooms decorated with the rarest cypress and Venetian plaster were filled with men in khaki. Where light music should have played, orders were shouted, and the sound of army boots echoed. The bedroom with the Jefferson bed became a barracks. The war washed the aura of elitism from the house. It turned it into a function. This was the first bell, heralding the end of the era of great private palaces. In 1946, after the victory, the Kellogg Foundation made a pragmatic decision. The house had served its purpose. It was no longer needed. It was put up for sale. The deal amount was $63,500. Stop and consider this number. $63,500. Even with inflation, this is a laughably small amount for a palace on the bay. This was a disposal price. Kellogg, who had once poured his soul and millions into this place, was by this time completely blind and had withdrawn from business. He would die in 1951 at the age of 91. It didn't matter to him. He realized that his legacy was not the bricks in Florida, but the grants for research and hospitals. He had outgrown his need for demonstrative consumption. The house was bought by William and Carolyn Nolan. Then, in 1964, the strangest chapter in the building's life began, the era of William Mansio. If Kellogg was a symbol of old, severe capitalism, then Mansio became a symbol of kitsch and madness of the second half of the 20th century. The new owner decided to improve the masterpiece. It was in these years that grandeur began to turn into a caricature. Mansio added what locals would later call the disco room. Imagine a classic Mediterranean interior from the 30s. Now, add a floor that glows in the dark. Add a ceiling that mimics a night sky with cheap electric light bulbs. Add garish mosaics that had nothing to do with the historical context. Kellogg's house, this strict temple of loneliness, was turned into a venue for Saturday Night Fever-style parties. This was a transformation of meaning. The mansion ceased to be a monument to personal triumph and became a monument to bad taste. But, ironically, these strange alterations helped keep it in the public eye. People talked about Kellogg's house not as a historical object, but as a local curiosity. Decades passed. Owners changed. James Nielsen, who bought the house in 2003, tried to keep it alive. But time is the cruelest creditor. Florida's moisture is relentless. The salty air corrodes stone. Termites gnaw at the wood. By 2021, the Villa Marina was in a state of deep, incurable crisis. Structural problems, asbestos in the walls, a greeting from the 30s when this material was considered safe. Old wiring, ready to ignite at any moment. And now we approach the end. 2021. The house is put up for sale. Price? $4 million. But this is the price of the land. The buyer, David Wank, honestly stated, "Restoration is impossible." The cost of restoration would exceed the cost of building a new house several times over. To save Kellogg's house, one would have to take it apart to its foundation and reassemble it. The public rebelled. Petitions, tears on social media. People demanded the preservation of history. But none of those who signed the petitions was ready to pay millions of dollars to repair the rotten beams. This was a classic conflict: nostalgia versus economics. Kellogg, were he alive, would likely have sided with the bulldozer. He was a man of numbers and efficiency. He hated loss-making assets. In his philosophy, if something stopped working, it should be replaced. The paradox of the situation was that people were defending not the real house, but the myth of it. They were defending the beautiful picture of the pink facade, unaware that inside, this place was steeped in loneliness, illness, and family discord. They wanted to preserve the shell from which life had departed back in the 30s. In early 2022, the fate of the house was finally decided. There would be no salvation. The Dunedin city authorities issued a demolition permit. This was the moment of truth. All the grandeur, all the pathos, all the ambitions of the Cornflakes King boiled down to a single signature on a piece of paper. The story came full circle. The grain had sprouted, yielded a harvest, and now the field had to be plowed over again. David Wank gave the command. The workers began to remove everything from the house that could be sold. Furniture, light fixtures, stained glass windows. The house was gutted like a fish. It was like a public execution of an aristocrat before a crowd of onlookers. But it was in this destruction, in this pile of rubble, that the last, most important lesson of this story was hidden. A lesson we must decipher. The dust settled. Where House 129 on Buena Vista Drive, once called the Pink Palace, now stood only flat, compacted earth. $4 million. This is what was paid for this vacant lot. Not for the walls, not for the history, not for the memory. For the opportunity to build something new on the bones of the old. This is the end of the physical existence of the Villa Marina, but it is the beginning of an understanding of what actually occurred in this point of space and time. The demolition of Will Keith Kellogg's mansion became a viral event on the internet for a reason. People watched drone videos where an excavator broke marble columns and felt a strange, irrational pain. Why? Because the destruction of Kellogg's house is the most vivid proof that wealth does not guarantee immortality. We are accustomed to think that millionaires build for the ages. We look at pyramids, palaces, skyscrapers, and see in them an attempt to cheat death. Will Keith Kellogg, the king of dry breakfasts, tried to do the same. He built a fortress to hide from his past, from his brother's shadow, from loneliness. But what remains of this fortress? It turned into souvenirs, in the literal sense. A few days before the demolition, the contents of the house were sold at auction. It was like the dismemberment of a giant. The four-poster bed, the very one on which, by legend, Thomas Jefferson slept, was sold. The stained glass windows, through which the blind mogul tried to see the Florida sun, now decorate someone's bathroom in Tampa. The doorknobs, which were touched by the hand of the man who changed the planet's diet, now open doors in the homes of ordinary managers and pensioners. Grandeur was dismantled and sold for parts. The Villa Marina did not disappear. It fell apart into thousands of fragments, dissolving into the daily life of complete strangers. There is a vicious irony in this. The man who created a product for mass consumption was ultimately consumed by the crowd himself. His personal refuge was packaged and sold, just like those very cornflakes. But if we turn our gaze from the ruins and look at the picture more broadly, we see a paradox, which is the main lesson of this story. Will Keith Kellogg lost the battle for his house. He lost the battle for his family, but he won the war for his legacy. He just did it not where he thought he would. His true monument was not the mansion in Florida with its asbestos and termites. His monument was the W.K. Kellogg Foundation. In 1930, when Kellogg founded this foundation, he wrote, "I want to use money to help children wherever they are." Today, the assets of this foundation are measured in billions of dollars. This is one of the wealthiest and most influential charitable foundations in the world. Consider this scale. Every spoonful of sweet cornflakes eaten by a child in 1905, 1953, or 2024 made its microscopic contribution to this financial mountain. Money earned on sugar, a substance that his brother, the Dr. John Harvey, considered a poison, now finances healthcare programs, fights childhood obesity, builds schools, and supports racial equality. This is the final victory of the dumb younger brother over the genius older one. Dr. John Harvey Kellogg died, leaving behind theories that today seem laughable and barbaric. His sanatorium closed. His books gathered dust in archives. His name is remembered only by medical historians and fans of strange cinema. Will Keith Kellogg died, leaving behind a machine that still works to this day. He understood that real estate is a liability. A house requires repairs. The roof leaks. Fashion changes. But an idea of service is an asset that is not subject to corrosion. The demolition of the mansion in Dunedin is not a tragedy. It is liberation. Kellogg hated inefficiency. If he could see, both literally and figuratively, what his house had become by 2021, a moldy box with a kitschy disco floor, he would have sat at the controls of the bulldozer himself. He was a man who, without hesitation, fired his own son for the good of the company. He would, without hesitation, demolish his own house for the good of the land. The story of Kellogg's mansion is a mirror image of the story of the Great Gatsby. Like Jay Gatsby, Kellogg built a palace by the water, hoping that the walls could hold a dream.
Gatsby looked at the green light on the dock of the Buchanans. Kellogg looked, while he could, at the sunset over the Gulf of Mexico. Both were lonely in a crowd. Both tried to buy what is not for sale: belonging, love, meaning. And both of their homes ended tragically. Gatsby's house stood empty after his death. Kellogg's house was demolished. But there is one difference. Gatsby disappeared without a trace. Kellogg remained. Today, when you walk through a supermarket anywhere in the world, from Tokyo to Paris, from New York to Cape Town, you see him. The red signature on the box. W.K. Kellogg. Remember that court battle at the beginning of the 20th century, when he decided to sign every box to distinguish his real product from his brother's counterfeits? This signature has survived everything. It survived the Great Depression. It survived World War II. It survived the death of its owner. It survived the collapse of his family. And it survived the demolition of his Florida mansion. Stone crumbles, wood rots, concrete cracks. But a brand is an idea, and ideas live forever. Will Keith Kellogg continues to feed the world breakfast. His real home is not in Florida. His real home is on the kitchen table of every one of us. And from this home, he cannot be evicted.